Well, that takes us to chapter 12. Chapter 12 is one of the most fascinating chapters in the Bible. This is about what none of us really think about ever, the war that's going on between God and God's 2/3 of the angels and Satan and his third. And it's all across the universe right now. These creatures are just all over, but they're going to be confined to the earth in chapter 12. It's fascinating. Demonic warfare raging. So let's see what happens. Chapter 12. Now a great sign appeared in heaven. What is a sign? A sign is something that stands for something else. So you don't, focus on all the elements of the sign. It's what it's talking about. So this dragon that we see, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and under her head a garland, on her head a garland of 12 stars. She's expecting, she's with child. She cries out in labor and pain to give birth. And another sign, here's the second one in rapid order, appeared in heaven, behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems on its head. What is that? It's a sign of what? Satan and Israel. Now there is what's going on throughout the universe. Satan has figured out that when God, it was Jesus, the Creator, was talking to Adam and Eve after they fell, there's a promise made to Eve that she would have seed. That's Genesis 3:15. Your seed, Eve, will crush the serpent, and the serpent will bruise your seed's heel. It's a weird verse, but it's powerful. It's called the proto-first evangelium, gospel. So if you're studying the gospel, there's the very first one. And it goes all the way through the Bible. What's it talking about? On the cross, while Satan was bruising Christ's heel, you know how they crossed over their heel, put a spike through it, and they're nailed to the cross, or one, it depends on which way they crucified, they'd have one foot on each side of the cross, which often was an olive tree. The Romans were so smart. Don't think of a 4x4 or a 6x6 post on a hill somewhere made of lumber that's been milled, and that the Romans would waste all that lumber. They crucified 30,000 people at a time. Do you think they brought in boatloads of lumber? No, they just took and hacked up trees. What's the most plentiful tree of Israel? Olive trees. They just bonked the branches off of them. All they had to do is have one piece of wood, a crossbar, and the rest of it was there, and nothing would move it. It was a tree in the ground. Most people were crucified, and as they were dying, you were looking right into their eyes. They were not on a green hill far away. Jesus was probably crucified right alongside the road to Damascus, just out the Damascus gate. And they dumped the bodies. They wouldn't let them bury them. They just tore them off the cross, often with the spikes still in them when it bent, and threw them in a pit and let them rot. And that's why you know that Joseph of Arimathea went and got the body of Jesus, because he didn't want him thrown in the pit. He wanted to bury him. So Satan heard the first gospel in Genesis. So what did he do? He got Cain to kill Abel. He heard that Eve was going to have a child that's going to be the Messiah. He killed the only one he didn't have control of. He had control of Cain, and Cain killed Abel. That's why 1 John says Cain was the first murderer, the first disciple of Satan. So Satan's been tracking all along. He wants to get rid of God's plan. So he got Cain, killing Abel. Then Seth was born, so he's going to mess the thing up. And he messed it up so much that God had to kill everybody on earth except for 8 people, Noah and his family. Satan's really good at messing up. And so that's what we're talking about here. This woman with child is Israel, the promised vehicle through whom the Messiah would come, and the fiery red dragon is Satan. So watch what Satan does in verse 4. His tail, this is still the dragon in verse 3, drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven. That's how we get that of all the angels, 1/3 goes with Satan and 2/3 stay with God. And the dragon, this is gross, stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, and he's kind of like the obstetrician waiting to help her deliver the child, but he's not really. He's really the dragon, because he wants to devour her child as soon as it was born. What is that? That's gross. No, that's the conflict of the ages. Satan wants to destroy the child of the woman. He wants to destroy Israel, the vehicle of the Messiah coming, and he wants to destroy the Messiah. Satan's goal is to promote global hatred for God's chosen people of promise, Israel. Zechariah tells us at the end, not the second coming, before the second coming, on that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all people. All people. All who lift it will hurt themselves. All the nations of the earth will gather against it. Now, I already showed you this, but look at that. That's Washington, D.C. Those are people protesting Israel in Washington, D.C. Jesus said in Matthew 24:9, they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. He's talking to Jews that would become the first members of the church. And there's amazing merging between the Jewish people and the Christians in those early days because the church was primarily Jewish. And he said, you're going to be hated by everybody. So basically, chapter 12 says the dragon versus Israel is Satan's constant plan. So let's look at that plan. He corrupted Adam's line. That's why the flood came in Genesis 6. Then Satan tried to corrupt Adam's seed by getting Hagar involved. Then in Egypt, that didn't work. The son of promise came, the 12 tribes came. By the way, how many sons did Ishmael have? 12. I mean, Satan has mirrored the whole thing and made his false plan all along. But Egypt tried to destroy Israel as a nation, killing all the firstborn males and blot out this line the Messiah was going to come through. Then Assyria came. Do you remember? They parked 185,000 troops outside the Damascus gate, and Hezekiah looked out, and there was like a square mile of army, bigger than the city. The city's only a square mile, and the army was a square mile, and he had no hope, and he just wrote his prayer request down, and it says he spread it before the Lord. He unrolled the scroll like this. He was so scared he couldn't even talk. He just spread it out. And that night, the Lord let the destroyer out of the pit for one night, and he killed the soldiers. He didn't kill all the other people. Did you notice that Sennacherib's rest of his army, all the people that had the food and the tents and the carts and the horses, went home to Assyria and told them what happened? The destroyer only killed the soldiers. 185,000 soldiers. There were probably 60,000 helpers. He left them alone. He only killed the soldiers. So it's amazing. So Assyria gets involved, and then Babylon gets involved. They go beyond Assyria. They destroyed the temple. They carried away all the heirs that were going to be the line through which Christ would come, and kept them as slaves in Babylon. And then Haman, when Persia took over, tried to kill all the Jews. Do you remember? That's the whole thing with Haman and Esther and Mordecai and all that. Then Satan didn't succeed in that. So Jesus is still coming in that line of Abraham. You read Matthew, that whole genealogy, Satan's seeing this. So he tries to get Joseph to cut out and declare Mary as illegitimate, that she's an unwed mother, and Joseph was going to have her stoned. That's what they did back then. That didn't work. So Satan gets Herod to kill all the newborns, and that didn't work. So Satan gets into Nazareth in Luke 4 and tries to get Jesus. They came and pushed him. They brought him right up to the edge of the brow of the hill and tried to push him off the cliff of Nazareth. And it says Jesus just walked through the middle of them. He was protected by God. So Satan sent 2 storms while Jesus was sleeping in the boat. And when the disciples described him, they said they'd never seen a storm like that. Remember, he's the prince of power of the air. He was trying to kill Christ in the boat. And then that didn't work, so he gets Rome to come, and they crucify him. And Paul said, if the God of this world had known what he was doing, he wouldn't have crucified Christ. Paul told that to Corinthians. He said Satan didn't understand that was God's plan. So Rome comes in AD 70, destroys the temple, kills 1 million Jews, and things have been quiet till now. There's something else coming. It's in Ezekiel 38 and 39. There's an attack of Gog, that's the ruler, Magog, the people that follow him, and Iran. It's very interesting. And then there's the final one about, Antichrist and Armageddon. Have you been reading the news? Watch this. I have a clip. Now that's something you've never seen before. That's Israel's Iron Dome intercepting Iranian rockets that are coming over the Temple Mount. Unbelievable. Some newscaster took that picture, and that's the Dome of the Rock, the third holiest spot. And if you read the news report, they're calling it the gates of hell have opened because Iraq has joined in as a part of this axis of evil with Iran, with Lebanon, with Syria, with all the Palestinians, with Gaza, with Yemen, and Hezbollah up there in Lebanon. And they want to get Israel. And that was just a test, by the way. I mean, they've analyzed it now. And Iran timed their drones and their rockets to all come at the same time to overwhelm Israel's system. And if it hadn't been for the British, the French, the Jordanian, and the American planes that were expending $5 million missiles for a $10,000 drone, do the math, the Western powers were using $5 million a pop bullets to shoot down a $10,000 lawnmower engine. Do you know the Iranian drones are run by lawnmower motors? They go real slow. And here comes this $100 million fighter jet, shoots its $5 million missile, kills a lawnmower engine. They did that to test the system. And they're going to keep sending them till they get their plan.